Hello, how are you today? I'm going to be reading Freedom Crossing to you. This is read with permission from Scholastic, and this book is by Margret Goff Clark. The first chapter, Midnight Visitors. 12:30. Laura Eastman had been lying awake for nearly 2 hours, waiting for sleep that would not come. From the oak tree outside her window, she heard a screech owl's quavery call. A moment later came the mournful howling of a pack of dogs. Laura punched her pillow despairingly. 2 weeks had passed since she returned to the family farm near Lewiston, New York, and everything still seemed strange and unfamiliar. The autumn smells of dry leaves and fallen apples, the brisk, cool air of western New York State, and most of all, the hard twang of northern voices, were almost foreign to her after living for 4 years in the South. Even her own father seemed like a stranger, married to a new wife, and Bert, her brother, he had changed most of all. Laura opened her eyes and stared into the dark. Soon she could make out the white lace curtains at the windows. The sight comforted her. At least this room where she had slept for the first 11 years of her life still felt like home. When Laura sat here sewing and the long rays of the afternoon sun fell across the braided rug, she would feel content for a little while. Then she could forget her homesickness for Virginia and her Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jim. She can even forget her brother Bert's coolness towards her. Again the dogs howled, and this time to the east, toward Lockport and a little nearer the house. As she listened, a new sound reached her ears. A faint tap tap. She held her breath to hear better. Yes, something or someone was tapping downstairs, but no one was down there. She and Bert were the only ones in the house this Friday night. Their father and stepmother had taken a wagon load of apples and potatoes to Saturday market in Buffalo. Perhaps it was a branch knocking against a window, but there was no wind. How Laura wished their old dog Prince were still alive. She had always felt protected with Prince around. From the room down the hall came the noise of Bert's bed creaking, and she could hear the shuffle of carpet slippers as he went down the back stairs to the kitchen. So he had heard the tapping too. A moment later, the outside door opened, and there was a soft murmur of voices. Laura sat up in bed. Visitors? At this late hour? Shivering in the cool September air, she crossed to her door and opened it wider. Someone was in the kitchen talking to Bert, but the voices were so low she couldn't make out what was being said. As she padded down the hall to the stairs, she heard Bert say, "I'll fetch a lamp." A deep voice answered quickly, "Wait, first let me draw the curtains." That voice, it had a familiar ring. Laura still wasn't sure who was speaking, but she had the happy feeling that there was an old friend in the kitchen. Already her bare feet were numb and she shook with the cold. Hurriedly, she returned to her room for slippers and a robe and then hurried back to the stairs, eager to join Bert and the visitor. Someone had lighted a lamp, for now a glow of light came through the partially open door at the foot of the stairs. The deep voice was saying, "This is Martin Page. He's had a long, hard trip up from North Carolina." Laura paused. Oh, excuse me. So there were two visitors. Oh, excuse me. Allergies. A chair scraped on the floor, and Bert said in his best company manner, "Please sit down, Martin." The visitor from North Carolina must be someone important for Bert to be so polite, yet he had only called him by his first name. He'd only do that if Martin were a young person. A soft voice replied, "Thank you, sir." Yes, the voice was young. Laura felt a familiar pang of homesickness at the sound of the southern accent. She started down the stairs. Bert should know better than to entertain company in the kitchen, even if it was late at night. Just as she reached the bottom of the stairs, the door in front of her closed softly. As she put out her hand to open it, she heard Bert say, "I hope Laura doesn't wake up." Startled, Laura pulled back her hand and stood there motionless. The deep voice asked, "Doesn't she know about your station?" "No," Bert answered slowly. "You know, she's been living down in Virginia with my aunt and uncle for 4 years, ever since Mother died. She's only been back here 2 weeks. Paul sent for her as soon as he got married again." "Oh, yes, yes, you've got a stepmother now. How do you like that?" "Well, Joel, I like it fine," Bert said earnestly. "Abby, that's what she said to call her. She's good to all of us. She understands about the station. It's Laura we have to worry about. Pa says we'd better not take in any fugitives until we find out for sure how she feels. Laura stood in the dark, her heart pounding. It was Joel Todd who was in the kitchen with Bert. Why had he come here in the middle of the night and with a visitor from the south? Laura had never before listened in on other people's conversations, but she couldn't move. Why was Pa taking in fugitives? Laura had a suspicion that was too frightening and strange for her to believe. Bert was still talking. Maybe she's picked up some southern ideas. Didn't you know you weren't supposed to bring anyone here? Yes, Joel answered. My pa told me you weren't hiding anyone for a few weeks, but we're desperate. When will your folks be back? Early Sunday morning. They're staying over with Uncle Daniel in Buffalo and bringing him back here for a visit. Then I'll have to leave it to you, said Joel. There's a pack of slave hunters in Lewiston asking questions and studying every face that goes by. Somehow they know about Martin. Now the conversation in the kitchen became painfully clear to Laura. The southerner in the kitchen, Martin Page, must be a fugitive slave. Pa and Bert and Joel must belong to the Underground Railroad that Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth hated so much. It's no railroad, Uncle Jim said. It's a secret organization for sneaking slaves away from their owners. Those Underground Railroaders have been worse than ever since the Fugitive Slave Law passed in 1850. I say anyone who helps a slave escape is a thief, because a slave is just as much a man's property as his cow or horse. Laura's hand strayed toward the doorknob. She shouldn't be standing here in the dark listening in secret. But if she went to the kitchen, Bert would be cross because she had overheard him. Instead of turning the knob, she raised her hand to the thick plait of sand-colored hair that hung down her back. This wasn't the way she wanted Joel to see her for the first time in 4 years. Her old pink flannel robe, with her hair skinned back from her face and braided for the night. Bert's voice broke into her thoughts. Can't someone else take him in? My Uncle Daniel thinks it's wicked to help the slaves escape. He might kick up something fierce if he saw Martin. And there's Laura. He stopped abruptly. Joel Todd said, Martin may be in some danger if he stays here, but he's sure to be caught if you don't take him in. Pa and I will pick him up before your uncle gets here. And I can't believe Laura would wish him harm, even if she has acquired some southern ideas. See, she was always kind-hearted. Laura could hear the amusement in his voice as he went on. I remember how she lectured me when I caught a rabbit in a trap. I'd set it for the fox that had been raiding our chicken coop. She wasn't more than 11 at the time, but she made me feel like the meanest fellow alive. Laura remembered well about the rabbit. In those days, she and Joel were playmates. He never seemed to mind that she was just 2 years younger than he. What fun they'd had together! Usually, Bert had tagged along as they looked for arrowheads along the bank of the Niagara River, or searched the fields and woods around Lewiston for wild berries, strawberries, and blackberries. Every fall, they had gathered great bags of walnuts and chestnuts and butternuts. Her mother had called her a tomboy, but her father said, let her go. She's healthier than those pasty-faced little girls who never poke their noses out of doors. That day, the day of the rabbit, they had gone out to the chicken coop behind the Todd's house to gather the eggs. She had gone in first for a moment, dazzled by the sun outside. She could see nothing, though at once she had heard a high, peculiar whine. Then her eyes had cleared and she saw the rabbit. It was a young rabbit crouched close to the left-hand wall of the coop, and it was crying like a baby. She could recall how she had to run forward to see what was the matter with it, and how she had seen that it was caught in a trap and was badly hurt. Joel had come up behind her and said, go on outside, I'll take care of it. A moment later, the awful crying noise stopped. She thought the rabbit was all right after all, but when Joel came outside, he told her, I had to kill it. She had cried then and had stormed at him. She had stood there and hadn't even tried to stop her when she pounded his chest with her fist. Why'd you trap that rabbit? She demanded. I didn't aim to catch a rabbit. You shouldn't have set the trap where the rabbit could get in. Well, I didn't mean to, but we've been losing chickens to a fox. You shouldn't trap anything. Traps hurt too much. The rabbit's pain-filled eyes seemed to haunt her. I hate you, she screamed and ran home. In an hour or so, she had calmed down enough to admit to herself that Joel had to protect his chickens from the fox. But she was too proud to go back and apologize. For several days after that, she hadn't played with Joel. Then he had come over to her house with a small jet-black kitten as a peace offering, and she had gone out with him to look for chestnuts in the woods. That day had been such a happy one. Joel had been so kind to her that they were even better friends than before. But only a week after that, tragedy had struck. Her mother had died of typhoid fever. and Laura, heartbroken, had been sent to Virginia to live with her Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jim. A womanless house is no place for a girl to grow up in, her father had said. Ruth is childless, and she wants Laura. Now, Joel Todd was only a few feet away beyond the door. She wondered how he looked. It was hard to realize that deep voice belonged to him, but of course he was 17 by now, practically a man. Martin's worn out. He's only 12 years old. That was Joel's voice. Laura could hear the sympathy in it when he went on. He came last night to a house on 6th Street, but one of those slave hunters got suspicious and came around with a search warrant. Martin got out the back way and headed for the woods. That's where he's been hiding all day, poor fellow. They had the dogs on his trail. I don't know how he managed to escape them. I found him not an hour ago, perched in a tree like a bird. This was the closest house, and being outside town, probably the safest. Then, too, the world's gotten around that you have a young Southerner living here. Again, Laura heard the amusement in his tone. I hear she talks like a real Dixie Belle. Folks aren't like to suspect a fugitive would hide out in the same house with a girl from down south. There was a brief silence before Joel asked, Do you think she'd talk? A burst of anger made Laura forget all caution. Bert and Joel acted as if she were some terrible monster. How dare they talk that way about her behind the back? She flung the door open with a crash that brought the three in the dimly lighted kitchen to their feet. Stop worrying about what Laura will do, she cried. I don't care if Martin goes or stays. And that's the end of the first chapter.